Well, joining me now to discuss if law enforcement agencies have a right to hack into phone data in London is Alan Mendoza, the founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. And in Zug, Switzerland is Eleanor Saita, a security engineer and hacker. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Mr. Mendoza, let me start with you. This is a part of Apple's response that they put up on their website. The US government has asked us for something we simply do not have and something we consider too dangerous to create. They have asked us to build a backdoor to the iPhone. So they cannot and they will not. Alan Mendoza, do you think it was the right thing to do from Apple?
Of course not. I mean, there are dangers with backdoors, we know that. However, there's a very clear national security prerogative here. We have a terrorist who has committed mass murder. His phone can't be accessed. Apple can create a way to access his phone. Apple should be allowing his phone to be accessed. It's a very clear case. This isn't a borderline case of liberty versus other matters. This is someone who everyone knows did it. He publicly did it. We all have seen he's done it, and they won't give access to his phone. That's a very serious issue on Apple's part.
Eleanor Saita, Apple's made a big mistake, according to Alan Mendoza. What do you think?
Absolutely not. If we undermine encryption and start building backdoors into systems, we lose our fundamental ability to protect critical infrastructure. The security of that infrastructure is national security. By undermining it as we build backdoors into things, we destroy the things that we're supposed to be trying to protect.
Eleanor, I want to quote to you the CIA boss, John Brennan. After Paris, where 130 people were killed, he said, "We knew the system was blinking red. We knew just in the days before that ISIL or ISIS was trying to carry out something, but the individuals involved have been able to take advantage of the newly available means of communication that are walled off from law enforcement officials." And of course, investigators had suggested that the attackers were using Telegram in the build-up to the attack. Don't you, Eleanor, get a little cold shiver when you hear that from the CIA boss?
Not at all. First of all, it's mostly not true. We know very few cases where the use of encryption has in any way prevented national security from acting on this information. In most of the attacks that we've seen, even where encryption was involved, they already knew the individuals in respect. They were already tracking them. The problem was that they're capturing too much data as it is, and they're simply ignoring the information that they should be paying attention to. There is no problem of going dark at the national security scale.
There is no problem of going dark. Alan Mendoza?
Well, the CIA director has said something different. I think I'd take the CIA director's word on that. I think it's quite clear that, yes, there may be collection issues in terms of analysis of data, but that always occurs. We know how the intelligence cycle works. You collect, you then have to analyze, you have to pick things out. But if we're missing things because they are being encrypted, then obviously they can't even be analyzed. There's obviously a very serious problem on that score.
Alan, I want to ask you about what the Electronic Frontier Foundation said regarding the slippery slope. Kurt Opsahl, legal counsel for the EFF, said if the US government can force Apple to do this, why can't the Chinese or Russian governments? Other countries will ask for the same power. Do we want to have this be universal? Does Kurt Opsahl make a good point, Alan, in terms of that slippery slope?
Well, I think there are two different things. Firstly, Apple is a US company. So the US company asking, US government asking a US company to do this, obviously there's a question straight away, same jurisdiction. Were the Chinese government, were the Russian government to ask Apple, Apple would be in its rights to say no. That might cost them the market, but then there's a cost in doing business with dictatorships, full stop. If you want to proceed down that line, we may well end up segmenting telecommunications in that way. But frankly, I don't want the Russians or the Chinese getting hold of private communications from Western countries. That's just a recipe for madness. However, when the US government asks one of its companies to do that, then I see no reason why that company should not oblige if there is a very clear and pressing national security reason for it to do so.
Eleanor Saita, do you think that we're on the verge of this becoming universal if a company like Apple gives in?
We absolutely are. Mr. Mendoza doesn't seem to understand that he's threatening the entirety of the security of internet communications and really the existence of the internet. The cost for removing security from the internet would be phenomenal, and it means that all of our IoT revolutions, all of our hospital infrastructure, all of our critical systems are going to be at fundamental risk. There's no way to segment or stop this once it starts happening. The demands will be universal, and we simply can't afford it. And further, I'd like to add that the NSA director has directly contradicted CIA on the matter of going dark. NSA does not have this problem. They are not concerned about people going dark. They're not concerned about the need for backdoors, and they've explicitly said that they do not want backdoors.
Eleanor, why don't you trust the legal system in the sense that if they have the tools available, they still will have to get a court order from a judge to look at someone? They're not just going to go willy-nilly and hunt down people. Why don't you trust that system, Eleanor?
Because historically, that's not what they've done. As soon as they have these tools available, they deploy them at scale wherever they can possibly grab them. And even if you trust the US to do that, why would you trust the Russians? They are going to have access to the same systems because in the end, we're going to be looking at destroying the internet. We're going to be looking at partitioning the entire internet, and we're going to decide it's not worth the cost. By putting backdoors into American systems, even just for limited cases, you are actively reducing the security of American infrastructure.
Alan, she makes a good point, doesn't she? It's a bit like nuclear proliferation, isn't it? Once one country builds a bomb, others will learn the technology, and so on and so forth.
Well, it's slightly different to nuclear proliferation, which is a very different ball game. But no, look, there are dangers with backdoors. Of course there are. No one's denying that. I think but there was a very interesting divergence in the response you got. On the one hand, it was the internet will end. It will all end. It will all be a disaster in that point. And then secondly, it came, well, actually, it might not end if only one country does it. Yes, it will remove certain infrastructure issues and make it more susceptible to attack. But actually, it'll only be that country. The truth is, this works both ways. Yeah. Yes, if you just open a backdoor one way, you might find that it can be accessed. I think there are, of course, liberty issues, but we have to face facts. We're moving into a world where terrorism has moved largely online in terms of communications. We are getting the forms of communication we could never have dreamt of 10, 15 years ago. Intelligence services have to play catch-up to that. If we don't, the blood of innocence will be on the hands of those who've said don't allow encryption to be broken. That's where it ends up. It ends up with terrorist attacks happening because we have been unable to intercept communications in that way.
Alan Mendoza, do you think that Edward Snowden has blood on his hands?
Edward Snowden certainly has blood on his hands. He's got blood on his hands in two ways. Firstly, because the information that he leaked has led to people directly being identified in terms of the intelligence they provided to Western agencies. And secondly, because the unveiling or the revelations of techniques used by the West has indeed led to terrorist groups changing their techniques and changing their patterns.
Eleanor Saita, I'm going to give you an opportunity to defend Edward Snowden and yourself. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Mendoza fails to understand the actual risk analysis that he's talking about. We are mostly losing the fight to secure the internet. We are already at the edge of having serious critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, and the situation is not getting better. We cannot afford to categorically hamstring and destroy the only functional tools that we have for guaranteeing internet security. Fundamentally, the problem is that mass surveillance doesn't work. We have very little evidence that all of this mass data gathering is actually improving response. You know, you claim that we need, that intelligence agencies have to keep up, but they're eliminating human. They're stopping the work which has historically been actually successful. They're focusing on tech. It's not working. It's time for intelligence agencies to go back to doing their jobs, which is tracking people that they already know about and understanding those people's intention, and to stop trying to dig into everyone's back doors and everyone's backyards and leave people alone.
Okay.
Without Snowden, we wouldn't have understood the scale and the scope of this, and we wouldn't have evidence for it. There was significant wrongdoing by both GCHQ and NSA. They have broken their regulations, their restrictions that they're supposed to act within repeatedly. There is no reason to trust these agencies to not do this again in the future. And without Snowden, we would not know this.
Okay. Alan Mendoza, final thoughts. Needle in a haystack, mass surveillance does not work.
What you're hearing is a libertarian argument dressed up in some kind of pseudo-security talk. It's designed from this perspective of saying to government, get your hands off people's data. Government's not interested in people's data. Government is interested in stopping national security disasters. That's what the government is there to do. And I'm afraid we have to move with the times and ensure that we enable access to communications so that government can do its job and that terrorists can be stopped.
Okay, Eleanor, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to wrap us up.
We're seeing the government, especially the UK, go after NGOs, after non-profits, after activist groups that are completely non-violent. The government has already overstepped the bounds. They are not using these tools in the way that they're supposed to be used. They shouldn't have access to them.
Okay, Eleanor Saita and Alan Mendoza. This interview will self-destruct in 10 seconds, like one of those wicker messages. Thank you very much for joining us. We have run out of time. It's been a pleasure.